Okay, so I want to get started just by telling you a little bit about what to expect. I don't do talking head. I am not a talking head. I won't sit up here and yammer at you the whole time. Because I find that the whole point of this is for you guys to go and make changes in the way you work, in the way you live. And if you come to ahas and realizations and insights, then that becomes something that you will incorporate into your thinking, and you'll build on it, and it will grow, and it'll become part of your future way of working. If I tell you stuff, then you'll see it as, well, interesting and useful, but you'll discount it, and you'll start wondering about cases, and you won't really incorporate it. So, so you guys are going to give the talk. I'm just going to help you figure out what you're giving the talk on as we go along. And we're just going to draw from knowledge and experience of everything here. With that, the first thing I want to do is figure out what we're going to talk about. So, nominally we're talking about software development happens through scale out, not scale up, and that'll show up frequently as we go. But the first thing I want to start is, what do you have energy to do? So, often people will ask you, what are you here to learn? What do you want to walk away from? I don't care what you want to learn today. What I care is, what changes do you have energy to make later? And what can we do here to help you make those changes? Or have conversations. What conversations do you want to have later? Or so forth. So what is something that someone in this room has energy to do? It'll be a very short talk if no one has any energy.
Probably give me like 15 minutes to digest it. We'll probably go running, I guess.
Right. You're going to go run. Yep. Yeah. Anything that people hope to be able to walk away from tonight and make a change in the way that they live or the way they work?
Make teams work.
Okay. So details, anything that you're going to change there, or?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Is there anything that you're going to change in your work or how you work? A problem that you're wanting to solve that you hope to be able to go after, or Go. Okay. All right. I was hearing you say something.
Make teams happy and proud.
Make teams happy and proud. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Collaborate with others.
Finish.
Yeah.
Learn a new programming language.
Today.
Start. A little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
Finish things.
Finish things. Okay. Anything else? People have energy they want? Yeah. Involve stakeholders more.
Improve cross-team, inter-team communication.
Cross-team communication.
Develop deep democracy in teams in the sense that encouraging all voices to be heard and engaged.
Okay. deep democracy in teams, and ensuring that all the voices are heard and empowered. Okay. Yeah?
Reduce surprises.
Reduce surprises. Okay. Okay.
What about supporting team autonomy, but at scale?
Mm-hmm. Autonomy at scale. Okay.
Team building.
Team building. I'm running out of space.
Listen.
Listen. More or better or something. Okay. More. Mo better. Okay.
Making things visible, like up and down the sort of hierarchy ladder, as well as like the value streams that are being worked on. So there's just greater transparency throughout the organization, specifically as we grow and scale, and there's all kinds of new people.
Okay. Okay. Making things visible across the org as we grow. Okay. Yeah. So that seems a decent set of, that's a meaty set of things that people want to go be able to accomplish. That someone signed up for. So if one of these calls to you that wasn't something that you proposed, there might be a person in the room that you could collaborate with. It's always easier to get something done if you've got an ally. So that's a thing to think about. And hopefully some of the stuff that we talk about today will help you, for some of these, will help you be more effective at doing it. Some of these we probably won't get to today. So the first thing that I want to talk about is at scale. What does it mean to, or what is necessary in order to do successful business at scale? So I'm going to ignore the whole Agile bit for a little while. And those who are at Folio have already done this part. So feel free to join in with everybody else. But at scale, there are really only two things that differ from in the small. So when we're talking about at scale, what do we mean by that? So when I talk about doing things at scale or scaling business or business practices, what does it call to mind? Things, keywords, features. What was that?
Alignment.
Alignment. Okay. It's another? Growth. Size, growth, those things. Parallelization and complexity.
Hierarchy.
Hierarchy, often. Dependencies. Communication. A gross failure of communication. Okay. Yeah. Wastage. Yeah. So yeah, we see a bunch of things. Scale means not just making it bigger, but handling more complex interactions between people, and being able to go in more different directions at once, and having that be both a good thing and a bad thing. So when I look at it, there's really only one fundamental problem that needs to be handled to do something at scale, if you can do something in the small. So assume you've got good, successful teams that are each independent, and they're able to accomplish whatever goal they're given, but that's what they're going to do. Right? What else do you need in order to succeed at scale? You need some way to choose where you need to be consistent across teams, and choose where you want to explore the space and explicitly innovate and not be consistent. Try different things at once between those teams. And then in some way ensure that the right one of those happens.
Are you talking about like the team structures or what the teams are
Could be anything. So a team, so a company might have as part of their brand, like Microsoft, part of their brand is backwards compatibility. If something works against, if you have a set of binaries and you compile it against Microsoft libraries now, then 10 years from now, it should work against the new version of those same libraries without you having to recompile. It will just work. Where Apple has as part of their brand a thing they're consistent on, innovative, and brings in the new stuff. So you would expect that Apple, if there's a brand new idea, they're going to incorporate it, and you're going to be able to use it. You expect that Microsoft, if there's a brand new idea, they're not going to incorporate it because it would break backwards compatibility. Right? Each of those has chosen something to be consistent across the whole company that are different value statements. Right? And so those are sort of like attributes of their product. There could also be things that are like the product itself and its direction, or the way it works. Another one at Microsoft is there's a desire that certain aspects of how teams work are uniform across the whole company, because the company values that people can move from team to team easily, and you don't have to retrain and relearn all of your technical skills or all of the ways that teams interact and what the roles mean. So those are all uniform, even though that means that it can't innovate as quickly in that space. Whereas Google values very strongly that each team works in the way that's most effective for it. And it wants to be innovative in how we work. And that means moving around inside Google, while you can do it, every time you join a new team, it's a lot like joining a new company, and you've got a big learning ahead of you. So yeah, those are sort of the things of where's it advantage to be consistent or to innovate. And what you find is that for any given company, there are really a small number of things that are in either of these two camps. There's a lot of stuff that you don't really care, but there are a few things. So just wanted you to have a quick discussion at your tables with the people there about what are a couple of things that at your companies it's an advantage to have consistency. And it won't be the same for all of you, but just sort of have a discussion about what are some things that it's an advantage to have consistency across the company at your companies. Okay. All right. So thanks for the discussion. Yep. Okay. So as ever in most tables, I expect that a few people got to talk and a bunch of people didn't. The next time that you'll have a conversation will be about the same length. Adjust as you see fit. Let's just hear from the room. What are some things that at various companies, just a quick statement of, what are some things that you're trying to make, that you see value in making consistent business value?
Priorities.
Team priorities?
Constantly taking your team and journey back and forth.
Okay. There's advantage to having that consistent across the whole company, so that no one's jerked around and you just everyone's playing off the same.
If you're talking about across the whole company, maybe then having a process for how teams get assigned priorities, so you don't maybe have some managers who are pushovers and they just kind of pass through everything the manager says, and then other managers who are maybe a bit more fight back and affect their team's time. So you have some teams that are inefficient and others that are effective.
So some consistency there. Yep. Another one?
It goes right along with it. Managing team capacity.
Okay. So what is the business value in having that be consistent across the whole company?
I don't necessarily know about it being consistent. Just,
All right.
just in general,
It might be a useful thing, but it's not something that we need to have consistent.
I would say related to priorities and prioritization is actually values. Not necessarily in, everybody has to have a specific value, but that they're all kind of coordinated on the things we find valuable. It also related to that would also be kind of the temperament of the people that we want to hire and want to work with. That way we kind of get consistency of purpose.
Okay. Okay. So the business value of having those be consistent across the company is?
In terms of temperament, ease of communication, ease of growth, ease of direction, basically making it easy in a way, and making it easy in such a way that it is something we don't have to think about and then stress out about and then work really hard on to fix because it doesn't need fixing.
Yeah, okay. So it makes it easy to consistently always go in the same direction.
Correct.
It makes it hard to change direction,
Exactly.
but if you've gotten a direction, you can consistently go that way.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. And likewise, values make it easy to do alignment.
Right.
Yeah, okay. What are some other things where consistency provides business value?
Well, one of the things that came up in our group that I thought was interesting was kind of a notion of what gets expedited or escalated. So we were hearing that at one of the companies in our group, if something is a customer service issue, then it's understood that takes high priority because that's one of the values of the high level company.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, what is escalation worthy? You want that to be a consistently applied decision across the whole company. Okay. Okay. Other things? Yep.
Might be too technical. Deployments. We had several people said locking deployments. All the teams deploy their code together.
Mm-hmm. Yep. When, and also there's usually value in how. Yeah. All having the same technology and approach for doing deployment just reduces cost and probability of screwing up late at night.
I would say think through that. A lot of companies standardize on one or a small set of languages. Google has it before.
Hmm.
Has one. This has a cluster called JVM.
Mm-hmm.
That covers non-technical as well.
Yeah.
The tone of your marketing, sales, and education departments.
Marketing tone. Yeah, it's sort of the original, where brand was originally coined. Talking about that. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, so these are some examples of things that different businesses might want to make consistent. And so the problem, when you're small, getting consistency on any of these is pretty easy. If there are 3 of us, then I start behaving in the way that I want, and either the other people don't really care and they start behaving like I do, or they do care, and then the 3 of us talk about it and we figure out what we're going to do. It's pretty simple. When we're 150 people, that doesn't work anymore. When we're 90,000 people, it really doesn't work anymore. Right. So the question is, how do we attain consistency? And in fact, when I look at problems of scale, my perception is 100% of the things that we do in scaling are about attaining consistency. And that's even true at small. When I look at software processes and the like, extreme programming has a whole bunch of specific practices, very specific practices on what you should do. Why? Because the goal is to allow a bunch of individuals to work as a team. We want to maximize the number of brains that are able to work on any given thing. And as we increase the number of brains that are working simultaneously, that causes divergence. And we want to be able to take advantage of that divergence in some spaces. But in other spaces, we all want to just be able to run the tests the same way. Right? So consistency of we will TDD, and we will do it in the following way, and writing tests look like this, and so on, allows everyone to easily read those tests and work on them. Right? So that's a place where those practices, each one of those practices is a structure to help us maintain consistency. As we start looking large, you see the same thing. And so if you look at like SAFE, for example, SAFE is primarily there because there are a couple of things that they highlight you want to maintain consistency across the company. Team priorities and prioritization is a big one, and shared strategic intent, which is halfway between values and prioritization. And so a lot of stuff in that system is about how do we, at a large group across multiple teams, maintain consistency on those things. So I'm not going to talk about the ones that are that we want to experiment on. That's the other aspect, is there are then usually a small number of things that it's worth actively experimenting. But as you get to be larger and larger, if you have reasonably effective teams, it's pretty easy to experiment on things. You just have different teams do things in different ways, and as long as they report the results, you're done. Right? The harder problem is getting consistent behavior across teams. So that's the one that we'll talk mostly about. So how do we get consistency? What's the number one most common way that people apply as companies scale and you get over about 100, 150 people to get consistency? Management, hierarchy, yes. It's you centralize the decision making. You have some group of blessed people who are allowed to make decisions and a large group of people who enact those decisions. You separate the decision from the acting of that, or upon that, which works. But it only works to so big a size. It's like any centralizing system. You end up with resource contention on your central systems, and your managers get swamped. There's more data than they can handle. There are more decisions than they can handle. They start having to operate on the basis of summaries instead of the details that the people on the ground actually have access to. And so they start making the wrong decision just because they can't process fast enough. So it scales, but it doesn't scale forever. So that's a scale-up approach. If we look at it as a data processing engine, look at the job of a business is to process information, or process data, find information in it, and then on the basis of that information, make decisions and take actions to accomplish some objective, whatever the business's aim is. It's a big data processing engine. Having management make decisions is a scale-up approach to getting consistency in those results. What other approaches are there for getting consistent results in data processing?
Like just promote, or actually I think just expose folks to different practices, like the inkblot theory. Good ideas will spread.
Okay, so yeah, there's try and solve things locally, and whenever you get a success, expose that out to other people. Okay.
Cross-training.
Cross-training.
They'll force it to work with different groups to sort of see how to do it.
Yeah, so both of those you commonly see in a place that's fundamentally their day-to-day is we centralize all decisions, right? And then we have an ancillary system that's trying to get some information to flow because information doesn't flow well through those narrow pipelines. Right? So what are some fundamentally different ways? Set aside business for the moment. Think of it as a data processing engine. We've got a big database. We want to be able to compute some analysis result over 5 zettabytes of information. What do? Parallelize. What was that?
I said MapReduce, but yeah.
MapReduce is one algorithm. Yeah, there are a bunch of them. And they're fundamentally about decentralizing. So we take as much of the problem as we can and we decentralize it. But then we need some way that those decentralized partial results matter. Right? We get consistency. So that is the scale-out sort of approach. And what we're talking about here is businesses who can do the same thing. So the same metaphor applies. Currently, most people who scale try and scale by scaling up. It works. But it only works so well. And if you really want to be able to handle large amounts of information, you really want to be able to do a whole lot of decisions very rapidly, faster than your customers can, and have really good response times, you need to scale out. So what does it require, thinking of data systems, in order to be able to scale out?
Each unit is independent then.
Independent units. So when you're saying unit, do you mean unit of problem, processing unit? What do you mean?
Well, yeah, I guess I'd say both. The processing unit, which is handling a relatively independent problem, or problem can be worked on in isolation, and maybe it has to be assembled once it's done or at some stage.
Okay. So local problems can be solved independently in some way? Okay.
You have to have a common protocol for communication.
Okay, yeah. You need a common protocol for communication, and that needs to have certain traits. What do you need? Like, not just any protocol will do. Right. What are some of the facets that that protocol needs to have? Especially in a human system. Yeah. It's got to be open. Anyone can initiate. Highly transparent, visible. Okay. Absolutely. Anything else?
You probably want to guarantee response.
With scale-out systems, do you get guaranteed response? Depends, but the ones that scale the best usually actually give you no guarantee at asynchronous protocols. And then you fail your recovery. So it's interestingly, if you really want to scale, you actually don't want a guaranteed response. You want async that might or might not go through, and then a way to recover.
It needs to be responsive.
Responsive? Mm-hmm. By which you mean performant or?
That and also any, yes, performant I think would be the best way to say it.
Okay. Any other traits that we need?
Maybe some mechanism for saving the decisions.
Needs to have history. Yes. And in fact, the history needs to contain not just the decision, but what were the alternatives that we didn't choose and why. Right? We need to save the thinking in some way so that people can refer back to it. Like a version control repository, for example. A wiki with backside pages that give you the notes on it. You know, those sorts of systems do that. Okay. Any other traits that it needs?
Flexible?
Flexible. Okay. What do you mean by flexible?
Things you're discussing change day to day.
Okay. So it needs to handle a whole new kind of topic you didn't envision when you wrote the protocol.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Yep. Another thing that I think is required is discoverable, accidentally discoverable. I can. There we are. So that I can find that you had a conversation in something that is now of interest to me, and I can stumble across that, and then because of the history, I can go back and look at it. So I need to be able to see things I should have been involved in and not have that be a problem. So yeah, I think it's a good communication protocol is absolutely necessary, and tools to support that, and it needs to have a pretty decent set of characteristics so that you can build on that. What are some other things that we need for scale-out consistency?
Well, we're talking about map reduce, that we need the reducer part. If the problem isn't local, if it's a global problem, there needs to be a way to reconcile various decisions into a global decision that's shared somehow.
Okay. I'm going to put a question mark on that one. So what we're trying to do, when we're optimizing a parallel system, the performance of the system is limited to the performance of the non-parallel portion. This is a parallel algorithm. So anything that we do as a global is going to be the constraining factor on our ability to scale. Optimally, we won't have it. But we might need something. So what we would look for is hopefully how not to have it. And if we do have it, then how do we minimize it? Anything else that we need for scale-out systems to work? Things about the context, about the environment, the problem domain.
I'm just wondering, like, in companies, like, does the hierarchy kind of have to be reduced, a flatter hierarchy throughout the company, so knowledge doesn't get siloed or cut off between gatekeepers and users?
Okay, so the first part, I've certainly seen examples where the hierarchy stays just fine. However, the second part, knowledge, there's something there. So when we're doing data processing systems, what is required about the data? Yeah, it needs to be universal and equal. Which means
accessibility too. Some algorithms, they've got their own memory domains, and others have the common memory that they access.
yeah.
And obviously it gets complicated because you control the access to that memory and that sort of thing.
Yeah, but the fundamental underlying data that's the input information, each individual processing unit needs to have full access to the same data. Otherwise, they would give different results for nominally solving the same problem.
Is that necessarily a problem? So we want to get the same results every time?
Because we're looking for consistency. So we're trying to get scale-out solutions with deterministic results. If non-determinism is perfectly fine, then that's not as much a problem. And certainly like search engines, where you're doing it on partial information anyway, absolutely. You do as good as you can to this, and then you call it good enough. Yeah. And in fact, in human systems and companies, that's probably also going to be the case. You do as good as you can to this and call it good enough. But usually you can go a lot further than typical companies do.
And I guess with the consistency part of that is the idea would be, if I give project A to, this team over here, they'll come out with a result that's nearly optimal. And if I give it to team B or C, they'd also come out with a result that's also nearly optimal. I guess is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, yeah. And that allows us to then not have to specialize that, oh, okay, now I need to put all of this sort of things to team A, and then, yeah, right, and all those flexibility problems. Right? I want to be able to scale out and just treat them all as able to do it. Any other things that are required in data processing systems in order to be able to do scale out?
Common nomenclature, make the variables are the same for all, I guess it's.
Mm-hmm. Nomenclature. Yeah, I want to extend on that one because we need more than just the nomenclature. We absolutely need to be talking about the same things in the same way. Otherwise, we will get confused, certainly. But we need more than that, too. What are some of the other things that we need in that same space? Also, like humans' values determine a lot of how we make a decision, right? And so we need not just the nomenclature, but our values to be in alignment.
How we think about the problem.
Yeah, our problem conception. Mm-hmm.
And certainly, when you think about some user interface or something like that, everybody's got their own visualization of what this thing will look like, how the reaction of the system is to human input or something like that. So the better you can align that, then the more likely you are to get consistent output.
Right. Yeah. UI as an example. Everyone starts with their own disparate ideas, and the more that you can help people conceive of the same problem, the more those ideas will come into uniformity. Even pretty naturally without necessarily having two people argue. Google has a good example of that. So anything else that we need? Human systems, we need a few more things than data processing systems. So, yeah. Facilitators.
Like, I guess people whose job it is to make sure information is being shared and flowing between the different teams of scale-out systems.
So, as I think about problems, the pause here is I really argue against a system ever needing any activity, but it might need a result that is commonly achieved by some activity. And by thinking of it that way, then we can look at other ways to attain that result that are structural or lighter weight activities or something else there. So facilitators is an activity, but then you talked about ensuring that that information continues to flow smoothly. That's a result. Is that a result that we already have? Is it part of universal and equal knowledge, or is it separate? And if it's or protocol communication. Okay.
I suspect you're leading us to culture, some sort of culture that enables this to take place.
I'm actually not really leading towards anything with this. So I do have a few more items on the list, but yeah, culture can certainly help. In fact, a lot of these are conveyed in culture. Your culture is the way a lot of those are conveyed. Yeah.
You need some set of constraints, like a minimal amount of bureaucracy that or people can anchor their decision making to.
Okay. We need some mutually agreed constraints.
Mm-hmm.
It might not be bureaucracy, but
Or yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Some constraint.
Yeah, and in fact,
There's rules.
yeah. So problem conception, values, rules, constraints. I'm going to just add that to that. Because that seems like all the various aspects of what constitutes a valid solution to the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that needs to be consistent around everybody.
Analysis, I mean, someone has to, interpret the data, and some people may interpret it differently.
I guess you can say like checking the results, right? So you've got all these blocks that are doing stuff, doing some processing. Did they get the right answer? Did they have an error?
Okay. So is that intended to be a building off of the same thing or a separate thing?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that
Okay.
lots of data comes out of your algorithm, and you may not know how to interpret it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So error analysis in some way. And an important aspect of that is it needs to be local. Again, if we're going to scale out, you have to be able to detect errors locally and respond to them in some way. Which gets to another part. Failure recovery. Which is also local. You look at any of the big scale-out systems, and they're a little fault-tolerant, and when something goes down, it's killed, and locally it comes back up, and there's no central monitor that's ensuring everyone's always around. It's just a local problem to ensure that systems keep working or reset. Anything else?
Checksums. Kind of.
Is that a special case of error analysis?
Yeah, non-local case of error analysis where one block gets the result, and every once in a while you want to check that against another block to make sure the results match.
Okay, which is still local in that two groups, any arbitrary two groups can do that without necessarily having to involve a particular third party. Right, so we're not resource contention on one blocking unit.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I would still include that under here. So another one that's really important in human systems is safety. It needs to be safe to agree. It needs to be safe to disagree. It needs to be safe to succeed, and it needs to be safe to fail. If any of those is not safe, then the system will become heavily biased in some direction. So that is, I think, a fairly complete list of what's necessary in order to enable scale-out systems to converge. So if you have a human system that has these traits, then you can have independent action by all the various people, and it will naturally tend to converge. Especially if it is around one of these things that we share a group value that we're consistent on. Right? If everybody sort of wants to be consistent here, and these are in place, then independent action will tend to be consistent. And that's what enables the scale-out approaches to agility. We don't have to create all sorts of big complicated structures for centrally managing something and getting it consistent. Instead, we can create very simple lightweight structures that ensure that these things are always true for anything we might throw in the hopper and be able to communicate and consider. And then it will naturally tend to converge. So a great example of this is Google, I alluded to earlier, when they did their massive UI redesign. So they decided that Google had a value that we're going to experiment and always have the best user experience for each given application, whatever that is. And then they heard from the users that a lot of the definition of best would be, I wish it all worked a little more like Gmail or like one of the other properties. And I have to learn a new way of working with every freaking Google application. So consistency was suddenly very important to them. So how did Google, a company that was by that point really, really large, get towards consistency in their UI in the course of a year and a half. First guess, how many people do you think were involved centrally in that process? There was a small central body. It did have a purpose. How big was it? Just wild guesses.
5 people.
5 people?
10.
10? 50? Yeah, it was 4. Yeah, so 4 or 5. Yeah. And what the purpose of that group was, they were reference librarians. That's all they were. So they didn't define anything about what the UI should be like. They didn't make any decisions about UI. Instead, they said, if anybody runs an experiment relating to user experience anywhere in the company, you can give it to us, and we will file it. And if anybody has questions about user experience, we will look through the experiments that have been run related to that and give them back to you. That's all we do. Right? Big reference librarians. And the only thing you're allowed to publish to us is experiments and their results.
And so what products did they have at this point in time?
This was about 3 years ago, so and everything. Yeah. Yeah, it was all the stuff, and they were trying to do it across the mobile platforms and the web and everything. And so eventually, as people started contributing more information, they found patterns were consistent and that sort of stuff. Then they started saying, okay, we now have enough information. Any team which has both contributed a number of experiments and has checked out and read a number of experiments from other teams is allowed to also contribute glosses. You can give me summary information that describe sort of emergent properties that you observe in a body of experiments. And we'll also file those, and we'll also give those back when you ask for them. And over time, all of the teams would try something. And they might try to do something in line with the way that other Google teams would. And they often would try and do something not in line with it. And they'd run the experiments and get the data and contribute it back. And as they went through evolution after evolution, locally in each team, they would get data, and then they'd see this growing mass of data over there indicating something. And they'd decide to run an experiment to try the same thing that some other team had found worked. And maybe it would work in their system, or maybe it wouldn't. And over time, they started learning, because anytime that things lined up, that they found that users did want to do it the same sort of way, then they just changed to it, because hey, it improved our product. Anytime it didn't line up, then they'd say, there's something interesting that's about the user base that we don't yet understand. Right? And so they keep running more experiments to see what it is, because probably both current approaches are suboptimal. And they keep experimenting until they found something that worked.
Can you give an example of the experiments that they did?
It was everything from what color scheme and font sizes should we use, to what sort of controls do what, to how do you handle settings, to how do you handle multiple screen sizes, what sort of information should always be in the main screen, and what when it shrinks should move to subscreens. And it was all the UX stuff and full user experience stuff. And they just made this huge, massive research. So now they've got, it took them about 18 months, and then they had a pretty darn good set of consistency. It's still not universal. There's no central effort to make it completely universal, but it's really, really close. As a user, it now feels very natural to move among their products because of that. And there was a fully decentralized effort. Scale out. They had a really good universal knowledge base that those reference librarians were managing. They had a clear communication protocol. They had good independent processing units. Each team could make its own decision and did not have to comply with what the data that was in the database. You do whatever you want. Each local prod was independent because your team owns your app. You do whatever you want in your app. Their communication protocol had all those features. Internally, you could contribute to the base, and you could also chats and all of that sort of stuff, and all of that was available. And you could find other teams and by what experiments they'd run, and then you could go see why did you run this experiment, and so forth. It had all of these traits.
So what's the counter argument would be, but they first went and did a bunch of work building a bunch of inconsistent products that people complained about, and made customers unhappy. Then they spent a bunch more time and money to then sort of gradually realign things through sort of organic process. The counter to that would be maybe more the Apple approach, which is a very top-down look and feel,
Right.
People have gotten in their heads.
Yeah.
So what's the benefit of and drawbacks of each one of those?
So Google has found it to be advantageous to be consistent across the Google properties. So has Apple. Amazon's run the same thing and found it's not advantageous to be consistent. Microsoft, it's certainly not advantageous to be consistent. In subsets of it, there is consistency, but in others, there isn't. And efforts to attain consistency would stifle innovation. A lot of the Amazon services are configured slightly differently or have different capabilities than each other. And they can do that because they don't have a need for consistency from property to property. People are willing to accept that A behaves differently than B because it's a different user using A than B. And so they don't need consistency, they can locally optimize. A priori, when you start your business, you don't know which of those is going to be better. You're going to pay a cost. And there are a bajillion things that you could pay a cost to become consistent. What are the three that matter? You can't know. Right? You can guess, and if you make big, bold bets, to borrow a stupid Microsoft term, make big, bold bets on your guess of the 5 things that it's going to be critical to be consistent, you'll probably be right with 2 and wrong with 3. And the 3 that you're wrong with will make your product suck. And you'll spend a tremendous amount of time working on those. And then removing it. It's a lot more effective, that's all the lean startup people have found, to get out there with the best information you can in the small and then just keep analyzing it and figuring it out. And if there is something that you know is going to be your thing, Apple's design, design is why you're going to buy Apple products. So that's going to be our brand, and that we're going to be consistent on. Okay, you're betting the company on that. Bet the company on it, right? And if it turned out that didn't matter, Apple wouldn't exist, and they were willing to make that bet. But if you're betting your company on 6 different independent things, your chances are really low of survival. Bet on one when you're small, that might be worth it. Google made the bet that we're going to be able to get everybody to give us their data and then give them back information as a result of that that'll be valuable enough that they'll just keep giving us all the private data that we can use however we want. They made a big bet on that, and it worked. So these are the sorts of things that make scale-out systems work. So let's look at one of these. We'll just do a hand-raised vote. You can pick any one, vote for one. What is one of these that we want to address? We're going to try and create a solution, a lightweight, simple solution that will allow this to be consistent across a company of, say, 65,000 people. Because why not, right? So what's one of these that we want to have consistent across 65,000 people? I'm just going to go through. I hear a lot of values. So I'll go through and you can raise hands so that I suspect we might know. So team priorities and prioritization. 5, 6, 7. Okay, values? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 15-ish. People and temperament. Okay. What is escalation worthy? Deployments, when and how. Okay. Language, marketing, tone, and brand. 3, 4. Okay, cool. So yeah, looks like values. That's unsurprising. Typically, people talk about the one thing that you cannot decentralize is shared strategic intent, which is values, right? And that we will always have our executive crew define what our strategy is going to be. So let's not do that. How are we going to have 65,000 people agree on their values and on their shared strategy without having any central body have any participation in that at all?
I think it's the crazy one that we have 5 items on the nomenclature, the problems, the conceptions, and the constraints. There. What do we do and how do we approach it?
Yeah, how do we get consistency on this sort of stuff? Yeah, so in a sense what we're looking at is how do we get consistency on this for then solving everything else? Stepping one step out, well, okay, so what is the problem definition that we need to get agree on? It's that we believe a consistent set of values that everyone can in some way participate in, change.
Align around.
alignment, yeah, is going to be important. So that's our problem definition. Okay? Consistent set of values is our problem definition. Rules and constraints probably aren't many. It shouldn't cost too much to align or realign. We should be able to change them over time as information changes. And it shouldn't cost too damn much when we do. Right? Okay? Any other constraints, things around there? I'll just do this. Okay, so that's our problem definition. What other aspects of a system do we need so that it will naturally cause that to happen across 65,000 people? What's another part of this that we want to define? Communication protocol. Yeah, it's usually a good place to start. So what would be a good communication protocol for continually coming up with and reevaluating and modifying strategic intent in a way that's going to be consistent? It needs to have these traits. Wiki. Yeah, nice thing about strategic intent is it's small. Like it's supposed to be a one-pager. A one-page wiki would solve that problem. Does that give us everything that we need here?
No.
No. What else do we need to add to the wiki to give us what we want?
Discoverability.
Well, the history.
History, discoverability, responsive, async.
The openness part of it, actually, there's a lack of discussion almost happening there. Lack of communication.
Exactly. There's a lack of discussion. We've got, this is the current state, but why? What was it that brought us here? What were the things that we were considering?
You need the talk page.
Yes. Talk page / chat program.
Mm-hmm.
Is that sufficient? So, I have evidence, yes it is. I know of companies that have done that, and that is exactly the communication protocol that they use. The only requirement is that, well, there's one other element, which means that, which is that the people who currently own that decision and make it on basis of authority need to be actively interested in not unilaterally owning that decision and in everyone being able to modify it. So it needs to be really honestly globally writable. Not just a wiki page that we can all edit and then the powers that be will take that into consideration. But that this really is what we're going to act from. Yeah?
Well, how do you avoid like the signal to noise or even a troll in this case? You know, someone,
Or just something stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah.
We've run into that not in this scale, but we saw police.
Yeah.
moderators, self-police.
Yeah, you can use moderators and self-police. Also, when something is this important and central, a lot of people are looking at it or are subscribed to change notifications on it. And so when someone trolls it, 50 people go in and fix that shit. Because they want it to actually mean something. If we're going to change the intent, then we're going to change the direction the company's going. And by all means, go ahead and converse on that. But you want to change it, okay, feel free. But let's change it for real. So yeah, there's something about it. Really has to be for real. Yep. Okay. Anything else that is necessary? Is that a sufficient system that we would have shared strategic intent naturally emerge? Any of these other elements that we need to do? What about local solving a part of the problem? Here we have a single global strategic intent. What happens when two different parts of the company disagree. Not because they disagree, but because they have specific actionable data from their customers that say, do A, no, do B. What do we need so that we can have the local problems be independent?
Autonomy.
Autonomy?
We need to have it so both groups can do their own thing, for lack of a better term.
I would say forking. Give me a wiki with fork. So that I can see, this is our agreed shared intent, and we forked it and applied the following diff. Right? But that's still globally visible. Everyone can see that we've applied the following diff and why.
There may be another solution to that problem.
Yeah.
You might decide in the wiki what this wiki does not cover, and leave that to the smaller subgroups to create their own individual wikis.
Okay, so yeah, you could have out of scope section. Okay. Yeah. And in fact, you can also have out of scope with a template of what we probably expect you to do in out of scope, but you're free to modify it. That's sort of that halfway in between. Yeah. Yep.
A voting mechanism? I mean, is that viable?
Edit words.
Edit wars work, actually. Yeah. I mean, you could certainly add a voting mechanism, but it seems like local independent problem solving via edit war often works pretty well.
Also, I firmly believe that when you have a disagreement at this level, it sometimes makes sense to just put the people who disagree in a room together and figure it out rather than have it take place on some textual forum.
Yeah, that's true. Since you are in the same company, you should be able to use a higher bandwidth protocol when necessary to resolve a conflict. Hey, let's put that down here under failure recovery and analysis. So we need a higher bandwidth protocol for disputes. Yeah. What do we need for safety? So what are the safety threats here?
Edit words.
So who's put at risk by an edit war?
There are two groups of people.
Okay.
One group of people are the ones that are in the edit war and that aren't enjoying it. And there's the other group of people who don't like conflict and that are dropped by the edit war.
Okay. So there's this, and then become non-participants.
Right.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, edit wars are certainly a potential safety threat. I'm going to collect a number of these, and then we'll talk about what systems we can do to solve a bunch of them at once. So what's other ones?
Punishment.
Punishment. Yeah. If you modify the strategy in your first week, what happens? Right? Do you get punished, or do you get people having an interested conversation with, oh, okay, what are you seeing that we aren't? Even if both of them eventually lead to a revert, it's a very different conversation. Right?
Humiliation. Say something that's stupid.
Yeah, humiliation is another example of punishment. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, punishment, humiliation, that would be another unsafety situation. We've got two. Any other bits of safety that need to be addressed?
Dictatorial edicts.
Dictatorial edicts, yeah, especially if you've still got people who very recently had unilateral power over this. You know, what happens when the CEO gets on there and makes an edit? Do people feel comfortable reverting that? So yeah, dictatorial edicts and power dynamics can certainly cause unsafety. Anything else?
What's the problem of local language? You know, like just people trying to speak in their own, discoverability when you don't speak another language and someone else is putting out valuable information.
That's in Dutch.
In Dutch, right? So how do we handle that in this open global 60,000 people company?
Yeah. So that's a problem that any 60,000 person company is already solving in some way. And the most common one is you use English, because it's sort of a universal trade language. But it's not perfect. That's certainly not perfect. And that's a thing to address.
Yeah, even in English, you have cultural differences. Some cultures are more argumentative and some are more passive.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So certainly cultural norms, and that can get into certainly some safety things. Cultural norms or language. Anytime that you have unfair or unequal access and you know, people are privileged over other classes of people, you'll have those problems. So for a number of these categories of safety problems, what are some things that we can do to resolve a bunch of them? Hopefully, since we want lightweight systems, a very simple system that will resolve a whole bunch of these at once. I saw
It's
it.
a very small idea, just there's the ability or the option you could post a change anonymously. I don't know, because that way you feel more open to edit something if you are editing something, the CEO just edited.
Yeah, CEO edits and then anon reverts.
Flatten the organization. There's still some hierarchy, but the person who making the change is maybe 1 to 2 levels ahead of you, above you, as opposed to 10.
Mm-hmm. Flatter org.
You may know them as opposed to, or have the ability to have some relationship with them, as opposed to no relationship with them.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that can help. That can be hard when you're 60,000 people.
But still potentially doable.
Yeah. Yeah. Other safety things that can be done. So a common one in other wiki communities out there is you have some way to report an incident. You have some escalation path. Someone who will listen when you have a problem. Sort of the original reason we had HR.
You're talking about issues in terms of the content generation itself, or just with the concepts that are there on the page, and you're just like, I strongly disagree with this, and I can't seem to convince other people to want to do it.
Usually the former. It's anything that's causing a safety threat. So I don't feel safe editing this because, yeah, a route for you to get that addressed. That's a good question. Right? Where would that go? If we look at wiki communities out there, Wikipedia or something, it goes to a set of editors and people who are there for purpose of escalation, and they make decisions and can take actions to modify who can do what sort of things in the community in various ways. It could also be that, depending on the circumstance, the proper escalation may be actually to HR. Probably not, but it might be. Okay, so has anybody seen an example of a system like this giving a group shared intent? You have? Tell us your story.
I mean, it was just with the tech support organization within the company I worked for several years ago. So it was a nanotechnology company. The product was very technically complex, and so they used a wiki structure basically as a way of sharing best practices. And, because you have these tech support and service engineers who are scattered all over the world, and some of them barely understand how the instrument works, honestly, but yet they have to solve these complex problems, sometimes with really old instruments. And so rather than having each one of them reinvent the wheel, it was this idea of, okay, let's have a wiki system. And so then they would enter information or the repository for information. The chat program part of it all was more email, honestly. But it was that sort of idea of, each tech support engineer sort of is a little decentralized unit out in some lab somewhere in some far-flung place trying to solve this complex problem. And at least he has this access to the central repository of communal knowledge.
So it wasn't actually solving this problem, but was using some of the similar systems to solve an adjacent problem. Yeah, okay. But yeah, Certainly these systems came about for purposes other than this problem, and there are a bunch of similar adjacent problems. Has anyone actually seen this be used to solve this problem?
What to solve what problem?
Values.
Getting consistent shared values. I see hands here, sure.
My company kind of does this.
Mhm.
We were tasked by our Scrum boards to come up with team shared values, and those kind of evolved up into shared values within the engineering organization. You can go past that, but a new team just formed a few months ago in Chicago, and they were trying to come up with their own team values, and they put out on a message board, which is a wiki-like message board. They asked, well, what are the other team's values? Because we're trying to come up with ideas for our team values, and we delivered to them all of our team values, and they turned into a discussion. All the teams started talking about team values against those kind of things. It's a discussion board, not wiki, but we keep track of all of the decisions in the wiki.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, very, very much that similar problem. Yeah.
So wiki was probably popular more about 10 or 15 years ago than now. I think it's the C2 wiki I was trying to look at.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
the original one.
It's around design patterns, and it still exists and still modified. But there's people either coining or kind of debating amongst themselves if the newly coined pattern fit into another one or already was one. And design patterns are sort of the values of how people want to structure their code. Which I brought it up because it is a design pattern language in the sense of like, the reactor pattern and all that, but a lot of it is also things that constitute those ones. Like, these are things that we think are bad, and here's why. These things we think are good, and here's why. Yeah, it was totally crowdsourced. There was no real central governing body, or if there was, it was very hands-off.
Yeah, there was not. And in fact, in the C2 wiki, you can go look, and there are wiki pages there on wiki gardening, on wiki management, on our values.
Stuff too. That's true.
Yeah, there's all of the meta stuff for our shared values and how we're going to work are wiki pages in there.
Yep.
Yeah, that's another good example. So there are a bunch of these examples out there. They do exist. We don't see them often in companies because traditionally, without thinking, we assume that values and shared strategic intent can only be accomplished by centralized execution. Right? But we just proposed an alternate. And this has been done in companies and in big organizations, in really big organizations. So like the Tea Party organizes itself this way, right? And they are freaking large, right? Regardless of how you may or may not feel about their politics, their organization is impressive. It is fundamentally decentralized, massively parallel, and they have a single page that is their shared values that anyone in the Tea Party can write to, and that if you agree to those values, then you are, a member of the party. Local chapters, agree to those values, modify them maybe a little for locally, but they continue to operate that way. And every year or so, they get together with an open meeting that anyone's allowed to come to modify that. You can modify it between those instances if you want, but they also have a regular cadence where we're going to re-examine those. And people can organize consistently on those shared values and then decentralized action. Yeah?
Just one thing, in the beginning I forgot to mention that we have a hard stop at 8 o'clock.
Yep.
It's one of the things I was meant to bring up. So.
Yep. Good, because we're just about done. So yeah, this is one example of how you can use thinking about what is necessary in order to make a scale-out approach to design a system that will actually give you the ability to scale out on a problem. Okay. And if you go through, we have a bunch of others, but you could look at all the other things that you want to be consistent on and look at what would be a similar system. And you'll find there's a lot of overlaps. It's not perfect overlaps, but a lot of similarities. Here I want a wiki and talk page. There I want GitHub so that I have source control plus forking and chatting on it, or whatever. But there's a lot of similarities in what I want. And so you can find that you actually don't need to create a full separate set of systems for everything that you want to be consistent on. You can create a much narrower, small, lightweight set that allows you to be consistent on things. Getting back to, I've forgotten who mentioned the flexibility that you could drop anything into the hopper. And so then you can choose the things you want to be consistent on and apply your regular, consistent process for doing that without having to centralize it to get there. I want to just do a little bit of a closing. I stole my space earlier. So does anybody feel empowered to do anything with it? Did you have surprises? Things that you didn't think of? New insights and ahas? New ways to put things together? Or actions that you feel empowered to do? Especially if it's something like here, one of these, and you saw, oh, there's a new way to do it. So we're just going to have a quick conversation at your table groups, about 4 minutes. And then each group is going to tell me one insight or action or something that you got from this. So, converse. Okay. So hopefully each table group has one aha or action to tell us. So we're going to start here.
Probably the biggest one was try to take the scout system model and genericize how you solve things, the whole flexible thing in Hopper and solve it repeatedly, even though it doesn't look like you can solve the same way. It's kind of like reusing the same processes and tools. So start to be consistent about the way you solve problems.
Okay. Okay. Pick some. Pick some tools. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pick some tools, use them consistently. Okay. Next.
So David was talking about the team values that the team leads had come up with, and I'm just realizing that we should really push that out to the rest of the floor and see if they even agree with that. That was done on a more centralized way, not included.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So include everyone. Okay. Next.
We were kind of talking about how we could keep this system going, or how do you infuse empathy and human connection in this?
Mm-hmm.
It's always better if somebody else say what you said.
Yeah. How do you infuse empathy and human connection? Especially if you're trying to decentralize and scale up. Okay.
I don't know if you get that one.
Well, I mean, we have an interesting problem because Lars is a team of one, and how does he scale? So, but interestingly enough, he came up with like how would he deal with his customers? Would he bring them into the open system and how would they participate? I don't know, just stakeholders. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do I bring in customers and how? Some good examples of that out there. Yeah. Next.
We were talking about how do you make a wiki with values like this? How do you make sure it doesn't just collect dust and become something that's not relevant or meaningful to people? And some of the things we talked about were keeping it simple, making sure that it doesn't get overly verbose or comprehensive. And we also talked about relating it to things that people care about and promoting discussions about it and and using, repetition, whether it's, at an all hands or, various ways you have of connecting the values to actual things that people are doing, and then making it easy to access, so that it's not just out there on the side and never looked at. When there's a change, people know about it because they actually keep track of it and care about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so stuff to make it so that it actually gets used. Keep it simple, and then a bunch of different aspects of how you integrate that into the regular work, so it's not just our pro forma in name only values, but it's our actual values that we actually use.
Right, it becomes culture.
Right, it becomes culture. Yep. Mm-hmm.
We talked about a couple things, but one of the things that we sort of had an aha moment over was, we have a lot of us have a lot of the wiki stuff in place, but we sort of neglect the history part of it, and sort of bring that element of it into our wiki so that we can avoid having to solve the same problems more than once.
Mm-hmm. So you've got a communications protocol that has most of these things, but is missing history. Yeah, bring history in. Okay, cool. So thank you very much. We have 1 minute before we have to leave the room. So I appreciate the conversation, and I hope you have found it useful. And we can continue.